Most product flows are fairy tales. Real users are messy. Think about this. What happens when a user strays from your planned product experience and your product doesn't know what to do? This is a great example of deviating from the happy path. So, when it comes to product development, we like to call the happy path the flow in which everything works perfectly. So when a feature works under absolutely perfect conditions, that is the happy path. The problem that we run into, though, is when we're developing products, either as a designer, an engineer, or even product managers, we forget to think about cases that can happen outside of the happy path. And that is what we're going to be looking at today. So let's go ahead and take a real live look at an example. So this is the sign in page on stripe.com. And the happy path would be for me to punch in my information. So I'm either going to put in my email, my password, or I'm going to select one of the buttons below, and then I'll be inside the Stripe experience. But what happens if I don't put in any information or I put in a junk email? Well, let's go ahead and take a look here. We'll say foo at bar.com, and we'll do a really secure password that's not totally password. And if we hit sign in, whoa, look what happens here. They do a little wiggle, they give me some feedback. And that is what we mean when we say plan for the experience beyond the happy path. Clearly, the team at Stripe thought to themselves, okay, somebody signs in here, they put in their correct information, and they get through the experience. Great. We've thought about that. That's our happy path. We're good to go. But what happens if they don't do that? If they mistype something, if they put in something totally, random or junk? They've considered that edge case and they've designed their experience for it. And this is something that we need to do when we're developing products. The Stripe team has spent a lot of time thinking about their experience. They've thought about the happy path and then they've thought about cases beyond the happy path here. And this is such a critical part of product development. However, we have real constraints in the real world, and typically time is our biggest pressure. We've got deadlines and KPIs, and we just need to ship, ship, ship. And this prevents us from exploring the full gamut of unhappy cases. And so, what we need to be really considerate of is how do we do this in a really productive, efficient way so we can think of these things without running out of time to actually ship them? Now, the worst thing we can do is try to solve all these problems in development. Developers' times are super, super focused on, translating all these design and product requirements into something that users can actually use. And the more they have to spend time thinking through and documenting and detailing all these cases, the less time they have on polishing and developing the overall experience. So, one of the best ways that we can speed up this process and make it more efficient is to do it before it gets to development. Now, from a developer's perspective, they're very used to getting designs and experiences where only the happy path has been considered. Typically, what you'll hear from developers is I get a design and they've made no plans for edge cases. There's no error handling going on, there's no validation. And then I have to end up making decisions that either the product designer or product manager should have made or we should have collaborated on and come to a better solution with. And so, truly, if you think about it, the end result, the thing that ends up in users' hands is the code. So if we don't tell our developers or we don't collaborate with them on what the cases should be that we need to model in the software, they're just going to make them up. They're going to come up with them on the spot. Now, that's not to say the developer isn't qualified to make those decisions, but it again adds cognitive overhead, it adds time to their eventual deliverable. So, how do we start communicating this to our developers? Well, one of the best tools we can use is a flowchart. Now, flowcharts are really simple illustrations that we can do to show our developers that we've thought through the happy path and then also other cases here. So let's go take a look at some of those. Here's an application design that I put together so we can see a flowchart in action. So this is Yard Help List, and it's basically a way to track reviews and services for Yard Help. And if we look at this experience here, this is the backend system where people can go in and create their listings, or the admins can do that. And what we have here is obviously design. So we've got some screens here, but beyond the designs, we have a flow. And so if we zoom in a little bit more, we can see what's happening. So we've got create a listing, which is our nice title here, and we can see the flow. So what I'm doing here as a designer is I'm articulating to the developer what needs to happen in this experience. So we're starting with the listings page, and this is my page style. So this is what a page would look like. I've got this one. This is for interactions. So on the listings page, a user clicks the create button. They're taken to create listing. They fill out the form. They click save. They're redirected, and then they go back to the listings page. And then below here, we can actually see the screens that correlate to this behavior. So we're on the listings page. We hit the create button. We're taken to create a listing. The user then populates their whole form, and then they hit save, and they're redirected back to the listings page. So this way, we sort of bridge the gap between these static screens and the behavior we want to have happening. Now, this, if you're paying attention, is only a happy path. There's nothing in here about what happens if somebody hits save and they haven't filled out the right information or they're missing required information. That doesn't exist here. And this is what I see time and time again from designers and product managers. They forget to include that information. So, how do we go about showing this? Well, a couple ways to do this. One of my favorite ways is to have really explicit flows for different cases. So, what I'll typically do is I will come over here and we'll just duplicate all this down, and I'll say create a listing, and I might do, some sort of divider here, and I'll say edge case 1, and we'll say empty form, right? And now I can start thinking about that experience. So I'll come down to my flowchart here, and it'll start the same. We'll start on the listings page. They'll click the create button. They'll be on the create listing page, and then we'll say doesn't fill out, right? And then we can go ahead and we'll click save again, and then we'll say redirected back. We'll say this is the create listing. And now we need some new behavior. We need to present the user with the errors. So we can go ahead and bring this over, show errors. Great. And so now, we can go and continue this process and actually make it, reflect what that flow is. But that's a little beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. But here, we're sort of connecting these dots now all of a sudden. We're going from the happy path, which, again, if everything's perfect and it goes the way we expect it, that's going to work really nicely for us. But now we're starting to consider, well, what happens if things don't go as we planned? Let's have a plan for that so we can present logical choices for our users to have them, not have a bad experience. So this is what we've got going on here. Now let's go take a look at a couple other examples. Over here on Airbnb, they have thought about things in tremendous detail. And one of my favorite edge cases that they've considered is the guest selectors. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. What they've realized is there's a limit to how many people you can have in your party. So if we go over here and we keep clicking, let's see how many adults we can add to this listing. Well, we're getting up there. Boom. So once we get up to 16, the experience changes. They're giving us the user feedback. If they had not considered this edge case and just had a happy path of let's just keep adding users or adding adults to our order here, we're going to not present the user with useful information. If I put 200 people in here, there's going to be no way any of their listings would have support for 200 people. And so they've considered this additional path. What happens when someone adds a user? What happens when somebody reaches the maximum number of users? And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm designing is I do a little bit of what's called factor analysis. And I'll start with my user or whoever is going to be interacting with the experience, and I'll ask myself, how could different users experience this? So in Airbnb's case, they've clearly thought about like, okay, well, what if we have a party of one, right? That is a factor of the user group here. So the party size all of a sudden becomes the factor that we can analyze the experience through. And their happy path is to go ahead and just do one. What if we had a family of four and we have two adults and two children? Now, party composition, in addition to size, those are two different factors that we can think about. And they've clearly thought about it. They've got a way for us to select children and a way for us to select adults. What if we're planning the family reunion? We've got 40 cousins coming, we've got the aunts and the uncles. We want to make sure everybody has a great time. Well, they've thought about that. And what they've done is they said, hey, we're going to have a hard limit here. And notice this, they've actually, 16 is the cap. So that's the maximum number of people you can have in any party and actually go ahead and get a listing on Airbnb. But they tell you that, right? So you're not sitting there planning like, okay, we've got the whole family coming into town. Uh-oh, we don't have any room for them because we booked a room for 30 people. No, they tell you, they let you know in the experience what's going on here. Clearly, the Airbnb team has thought beyond the happy path. Let's take a look at one final example here. So we'll come back to Stripe. Stripe is doing checkout experiences, and there are so many things that can go wrong in a checkout experience. Stripe actually has a whole page here that we're going to take a look at that is dedicated to failure states. And by definition, this is not the happy path. So they're helping you plan with your integration what to do when things don't go exactly the way you would expect them to. So if we're coming down here and we sort of reading through this code here, we can see they've got different cards that we can go ahead and test with. And if we scroll through all the countries, we can start seeing declined payments. So they give us ways for us to test our integration and say, hey, when a card is declined, you can test this in your integration and you can plan and design for what that experience should be. Or if your card is expired, we can go down to fraud now. They tell us what happens when you get a fraud block on that card as well, or there's invalid data in the card. You've got the wrong year, you've got the wrong CVC code. So Stripe does a really excellent job of supporting you as a developer and a designer and giving you the information you need to design for all of these different edge cases. And that's so, so important. And it gets us to the crux of what makes designing for the happy path and beyond so, so important. At the end of the day, we're trying to save our developers from guessing or having to redo our work. If we don't explicitly tell our developers, hey, this is what the happy path is, this is what every other edge case we've considered is, and we want your input on that, or we want you to design it and implement it this way, they're going to figure it out on their own, right? They're going to redo your work. They're going to make their own assumptions, and they're going to do it to the best of their ability. The other thing that's really, really important is it helps with QA or quality assurance. If we have documented all the edge cases before development, we know what to test against when we go into QA. So that way, when we actually make sure that this thing is ready for production and something that people can start using, we have that criteria list to test against. If you don't document all these edge cases and you just say, here's the happy path, good luck, QA, they're only going to test the happy path and we're not going to deliver a really robust experience. And most importantly, if you start thinking beyond the happy path and you start working with your developers to identify these edge cases, to do your flow charts, and to actually say, hey, this is how we've thought about the different parts of this experience, you're going to build trust with them because it shows that you care. And it shows you care not just about the end product experience, but that you care about them doing their job and you're equipping them with the tools and the information to make informed development decisions. And that goes such a long way. So, next time you're about to hand off some work to developers, just make sure you're taking at least 10 minutes to map out two ways the flow might break and what you'd want the user to see if that would happen. Think about those factors we talked about and play with them. Your users are going to be a little bit different than Airbnb's, but what if there were more of them? What if they had different levels of experience with your product? What if there was a super user versus a newbie? You can go ahead and play with those factors and come up with different edge cases. And speaking of handoffs, in our next episode, we're going to be taking a deeper look at what devs really want to see when they're getting their work. So stay tuned. We're excited to see you in the next episode.